This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. Hello, everyone. My name is Gerard Robinson. Welcome to another session of In Character. For those of you who watch us with regularity, or for those of you who are watching us for the first time, I have an opportunity monthly to talk to a group of educators across the country, really across two different parts of oceans, to really say, what do you do? How are you making an impact on education? And what can we do to help? Now, every session is special. I say that about every group, but this one really is special because we're going to have an opportunity to hear from educators who decide to become entrepreneurs. Now, when we think about teachers in the classroom are in fact entrepreneurs, so that's nothing new. But we have people who've actually said, you know what, I'm going to take my skill set and create a business. And so without further ado, let me welcome the 8 people that we have. All of you, I believe, are first timers to In Culture. So welcome and thank you for joining me. And I think we're also joined by a little one in the corner. So we may have entrepreneur in training. Glad to see that in action. So again, welcome. What I want to do is just do a round robin, and it'll give you an opportunity to tell me your first and last name, where you live. And then once we do that round robin, I'll go into the first of 3 questions. So I'm going to start with you, Tim, since I see you closest. Tell us who you are, and then we'll go around.
My name is Tim Dove, and I live in the city of Columbus, Ohio. And what else did you want to know?
I know you're going to talk to us about your work as an entrepreneur. Where did you work before you became an entrepreneur?
Before I was an entrepreneur, I'm a K-12, actually I'm a secondary social studies teacher,
okay.
And taught for 32 years in a district just outside of Columbus. And actually got to set up our own, redesign a new public middle school in the process.
Okay.
And did a lot of really reform-minded team teaching, co-teaching, caring for the whole spectrum of kids.
Thank you. My wife's family is from Ripley, Ohio, and a number of them settled in the Columbus area. So it's good to see someone from the Buckeye State. Let's go to you, James. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again as well, Gerard. James E. Ford. I am the 2015 North Carolina Teacher of the Year. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm also the Executive Director of the Center for Racial Equity and Education, the creative acronym known as CREED.
Great. James had a chance to attend one of the national summits that I had in Washington, D.C., so good to see you again. Paul, let's go to you.
Hi, I'm Paul Andersen. I live in Bozeman, Montana. I was a science teacher for 20 years, and now I'm a consultant with the next generation science standards. I have a website called The Wonder of Science. I became a consultant, which was hard for me to wrap my head around that word, and that I was a consultant after being a teacher for 20 years. Mm-hmm. I also am a YouTuber, which also makes me laugh when I say it. And now I'm an entrepreneur, which I also have a hard time now saying it that you said it. And so I think moving into roles is always an adjustment. But Gerard, thanks for having me. I look forward to learning from all of you.
Thank you. I was on the phone today with a friend of mine named Gavin. In fact, his family's headed to Montana for a 2-week vacation. So let them know that we had a chance to talk to someone from that state on here. Let's go to you, Karen.
Hi, my name is Karen Toavs. I live in Williston, North Dakota. Like Paul, I've also been teaching for 20 years and middle school and high school, so secondary language arts and history. And I have my own consultant company also. It's called The Thinking Extreme. I specialize in rural remote school districts, areas that don't typically get professional development resources.
Yep.
So that's kind of my growing entrepreneurship project, I guess.
Thank you. What's so funny is pre-COVID-19, people talked about rural education as if it was something. And all of a sudden, rural education became really important. Bandwidth. Oh, how do we reach people? So you're already ahead of the game, so we'll make sure we give you some time to talk about that. Julia, let's go to you.
Hello, my name is Julia King-Poole. I am in New York City, but I was the 2013 DC Teacher of the Year. And I started my career in Gary, Indiana with Teach for America, and then worked as a teacher and a school leader in Washington, D.C. For a total of 10 years. And I started studying the mindsets of high-performing teachers that don't burn out. And now I have a consulting company called Burn in Mindset, where I partner with high-performing schools and help them retain their top talent.
Excellent. You mentioned Gary, Indiana. Of course, I think of the Jackson Five, and DC. I used to work for DC Public Schools in the late '90s. So good to see one of our winners. Let me go to Jeb. Is it Jed or Jeb?
Jed with a D.
Jed
Jed,
D.
red and bed and fed and all that good stuff.
Red, Jed.
Well, if you like that, I'll tell you how to say my last name. It's Dearyberry. Dairy like a cow and berry like a fruit.
Got it.
Some people call me Fruity Cow, and I'm okay with it.
Got it.
But my name is Jed Dairyberry. I am from South Carolina, Spartanburg, South Carolina. I have been an educator for almost 20 years. Before I went into the consulting world full time, I was a first and second grade teacher. Then I moved into professional development and higher ed in the middle of that. And now I work primarily in higher ed. And on the side, I started my own LLC, MrDairyberry.com. And my focus is just to equip, encourage, and empower the profession. Equip them with new ideas, new ways of thinking, new tools, encourage them through meaningful, relevant, and fun professional development, because there's not enough of that out in the world, and empower them to go into their communities and make change and be the voice that educators can be, and see the change come through many avenues in their schools and in their communities.
Okay.
I guess my niche is that I talk a lot about creativity and playfulness, playful learning, the power of play for all ages. Just wrote a book about it, came out last summer during the middle of the pandemic. Not the best time to launch a book, but hey, it's out there.
A lot of people were more available to read too.
Yep.
So, good stuff. We'll look forward to learning more. Ashley, let's go to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Ashley Lamb-Sinclair. I am living here in Louisville, Kentucky, Kentuckian born and bred. I was the 2016 Kentucky Teacher of the Year, which was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And at the same time that happened, I launched soon after that a ed tech platform called Curio Learning, which kind of just happened. It was nothing I really pursued. It was something that there was an opportunity knocking, and I just kept following the trail. And that opened up my world in quite a few ways. I started teaching when I was 22, first gen college student. So entering into the world of startup life was very eye-opening. And I eventually left that company that I built and spent some time working with a couple of international organizations. Now I work with National Geographic Education. I was a fellow last year, and I'm rolled over into a consultant role now, primarily leading lots of different projects. My favorite of which is a project called 2892, which is about telling untold, mistold, misappropriated, misunderstood stories of justice and equity around the country from community voices who often go unheard.
And we'll come back and you'll tell us what the 2892 stands for. All right. Let me go to Barbara. Yes.
Hi, I'm Barbara Martinelli, LaSaracina. I am coming to you from New Jersey, which is having terrible storms rolling through.
Okay.
So if you hear loud noises or we black out, that is why. We're having minor crazy weather here. It's about 100 degrees and we're trying to break our humidity. So we're hoping that the rain is going to help us. I was a former biomedical engineer where I worked with TMB lymphocytes and virucides. And I left that profession after a decade when my own children went into the public school system. And I became concerned about the lack of depth in math and science education at the elementary and middle school level. And rather than complain that I didn't think the programs were robust enough, I decided to leave medicine and become a teacher, and I specialize in math and science. And I spent 25 years in the classroom teaching math and science at the upper elementary and middle school level. Then I became a supervisor in math and science, and I left the classroom in 2015 to work for a company in Vermont on a consulting basis called Exemplars. And they do in-depth, multifaceted types of in-depth problem solving. And I also go into underserved districts now to help train their teachers. And I also work this year specifically and last year with pods of students in my home. With the lack of in-person education this year, students were desperate to have that one-on-one. So I had pods of kids in my house every day. In fact, tomorrow's my last day with them. Today I had a lot of kids here. It was a lot of fun, and I'm going to miss them terribly. So this has really blossomed into a beautiful experience for me to have this very close relationship with students now and teachers. And also to leave that I have been in for the 25 years I taught in a very affluent district where students had every advantage, to now spending most of my time in areas like Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens and underserved districts. And I really feel that we make a tremendous difference when we all take up the mantle to help close this achievement gap with our students.
Thank you. So we've got a good swath of the map. We've got Ohio, we've got Montana, North Carolina. Well, I know we have DC. I think you may have moved, South Carolina, Kentucky, New Jersey. And am I correct in saying North Dakota? Yep. And so we've got a nice swath. Some of you, in fact, started to walk into the first question, more or less what attracted you to education. And some of you have shared that. So let me actually do a twist on that question. You were in the classroom, some of you longer than others. What was the aha moment when you said, you know what, I want to become an entrepreneur? And that was like the one thing that said, I'm going to just leave the classroom, or even if I stayed and do something different. Who wants to go ahead and kick us off with that? Anyone can just jump in as you like.
I will, if it's okay.
Oh, the New Jersey in you. Yes, go ahead.
It's hard to hold Jersey back, I know.
Exactly.
And if I get overbearing, you can just tell me to be quiet, because we're okay with that. Really, for me, I loved being in the classroom, and there are moments when I miss it. However, I felt the constraints of where we were going in terms of education, the amount of things that we were putting on teachers' plates that really, to me, did not impact education in a positive way. The administrative stuff that was coming, boards of educations where parents had their own agendas on what they wanted for their particular children. And this all trickles down to the teachers. And I was the teacher leader in our building for, 15 years. And just the teachers coming to me going, how much more can they give us to do? That really detracts from the time. So it was kind of disrespectful of our time where we wanted to be with our students and creating the best lessons and, talking to other teachers and putting together the absolute best educational experience for our students. But we were being handcuffed by paperwork and reports and things that really had nothing to do with making that the best experience for our students. And, there comes that day when you say, I can do better, I can do more. And maybe the only way I can do that is to break out on my own. And for me, it's been the best thing I ever did. I mean, the relationships I've forged with students, with parents, with school districts is been the finest moments of my life.
So you were corporate America, moved into teaching, and now you're going back out to entrepreneurship. When you went into teaching, did you go through a traditional or an alternative certification?
I went through the alternate route, and I was one of the first people to go through that. Actually, our then governor, Tom Kane, I was actually at a dinner from my husband's company, and I was talking about my concerns, basically with math, science, all across, these younger grades. And, basically he said to me, well, you could complain about it, or you could do something about it. You could leave medicine and go into my program, and you can become a teacher in, 1 year by going through this alternate route program. And I was skeptical, I'll tell you the truth, because the year didn't seem like, I remember getting the keys to the classroom the first day thinking, I am not prepared. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with little people when they come in. Right. I'm good with people under anesthesia and people on stretchers, but I don't know what to do. And, so there's a lot of learning on the job there, but it was great. And I loved it. I loved it. And the day I started not to love it was the day I knew it was time to leave.
Got it. Thanks for kicking us off. Someone else can go ahead and just jump in.
Gerard, do you mind if I follow up on that really
No,
briefly?
go right ahead, James.
I wanted to say that, for me, it's interesting because once I entered the classroom, I never really had any ambitions of leaving. But for me, education was the second act, much like Barbara's of a career. Right, I was doing nonprofit work coming out of college. I was working uh, anywhere from community health organizations to in the out of school time, working with youth. And so, when I received the revelation that, I was a teacher, and because I just could not get enough of the FaceTime with these young people, uh, once I entered, I wanted to stay there. I was going to try to find a path where I could be there forever. But the truth be told was, even when I was an undergrad and before, I was always doing ambitious stuff. I, started my own, newspaper independently published on campus. Like, I was doing music amateurly on the side. So I kind of knew what it was to have that entrepreneurial spirit. It wasn't until the experience with in-store and coming in contact with the other teachers of the year and the encouragement and just the ability to network with other people who are just profoundly talented and gifted in this field, and the constant encouragement to just maximize your full potential, that I entertained the possibility of doing something else. And because of the student groups that I work with, who were often the same groups of kids who used to be in my teen center, um, it got to the point where I was like, I think I could consult other teachers on how to work with these student groups in a way that is affirming, that is loving to their cultures, that sees their fullness as human beings. And the point at which the equilibrium became a disequilibrium, where I thought that I actually could be of greater service outside the classroom than within, is when I actually decided to leave. But I did so begrudgingly. I really didn't want to leave.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't either. And I loved what Paul said earlier about, it's difficult to even say the word consultant. My wife always teases me that I'm lousy at it because, teachers are not wired in our heads to work the way that we're told consultants also do things. So, when we would have budgets and they'd say, how were you able to do that so cheap? And I'm like, I was a K-12 teacher for 32 years. You can get 9 cents out of a nickel every single time. It doesn't have to be crazy. But I think over time, as a way to keep me in the classroom and keep me interested, I was more of an opportunistic consultant. And I was always interested in empowering my kids. And ways to find ways to empower kids further was to broaden their scope of who they came in contact with. So I ended up working with the State Department in Poland and Ukraine and Russia and Morocco, writing national curriculum and training teachers on every single vacation that we would have. I mean, I would not leave the room. I'd bring those folks, my colleagues, to my classroom during the school year because I wanted them to meet these people. We were doing Skype before anybody was doing Skype. And I remember one time I was in Marrakesh and I was just parading all these colleagues of mine across from around the world in terms of what we were doing and how we were deciding curriculum and getting feedback from these kids and the thinking of that. And then I started taking kids overseas, and we worked, oh my gosh, we had to save so much money to make it happen for students, but we'd take 50 kids overseas every other summer as a study tour and really shift their mindset that way. So we were bringing people to the school or we were taking people to the world. And then, the organization I was doing that with would say, hey, would you come and teach teachers how to actually do study tours and understand this is not a vacation, or how do you actually deal with other cultures and how do you deal with yourself? And so then I got to do that. And then when our governor decided we were going to change how retirement worked, and it was costing me $5,000 to $20,000 a year to stay in the classroom, that was my push. And then all of a sudden I'm working in Hong Kong, again, with rules on formative assessment and what a PLC really should be. And then I started working with, that was Battelle for Kids. And then I took a job I just kind of hopped and skipped for a while. And then I was working with Learning Forward for a few years and working in states. I loved that work because I was working directly with colleagues that were in the classroom in the weeds. And then I started working for CCSSO, partially as a result of my connections from being the Ohio Teacher of the Year for 2011 and 2012. And I've been there for 8 years now, working on 8 different initiatives in 18 states with a whole host of incredible people. And now it's about how do we care for, now I'm on the policy side. How is it that we can care for kids that are marginalized, teachers that aren't supported? Because when I started that work, the national conversation, I remember it all being about, we're going to fire to excellence. And, the problem was bad teachers. And it's like, no, the problem is lack of supports. And what does that look like? A lot of what Barbara was talking about earlier, pile it on, but don't take anything off. And now we're responsible for everything. So where's our lanes? And I can't believe I'm in year 8 of that already. So as a consultant, that really became my entrepreneurial piece. I'm not doing things on my own. I've connected to other organizations, and that served me well, and hopefully served the people I work with well.
So James and Barbara were outside of the school, then came into teaching. From what I've heard from you, you're definitely what a friend of mine would call a serial entrepreneur along the way, and doing it internationally. Did you go directly from school to teaching, or was there something in the middle?
Oh, my dad was clergy and my mom was a teacher, and we wrote curriculum starting when I was 12. I was on an international teaching team. We were in the civil rights. My bedroom was rarely my own. It was people visiting through the house when we were doing things. And it was a wonderful childhood in terms of really pushing thinking beyond normal, what most people would call normal. I thought it was normal, but found out later, no, that was not a normal situation. So I was always interested in teaching, always.
Paul, see your hand up. Let's go to you.
Yeah, I think if you're all serial entrepreneurs, I guess I'm entrepreneurially monogamous. I was just a teacher from the beginning, and I just saw myself always being a teacher. And then I happened to, I think money is something that you should always talk about when you're talking about entrepreneurship. I'm from Montana, so I was poor. And so there was a point where I started doing YouTube videos, then I got some money from that. So I was able to take a sabbatical. And so for me, entrepreneurship was just one jump that I had to do. I had to say, like, okay, I have enough money for a year, so let me try this thing, and I'm going to be bad at it, and then I'm going to do I'm going to pivot and figure out like where that niche is. I think, Tim, to kind of go back and play on the consultant thing, no one is qualified to be a consultant when you do it the first time. But the second time you do it, then you have things that you can bring from the last time. And so it's something that you really can't learn until you're actually doing it. And I think it's something that I've learned to be more entrepreneurial because of that first jump. And I like an example could be a year ago in COVID. I remember as a consultant, I would work with teachers all the time, and they would complain about how hard COVID is, but I don't think they always understood how hard it is for everybody out there. So like as a consultant, I went from fully employed to unemployed, like so many essential workers. And then you have to hustle and you have to get that next job and the next. And so I think I've learned to be more entrepreneurial. But if I wouldn't have the privilege and just that ability to make that jump, I don't know if I would have ever done it. And I think a lot of teachers are stuck like that. They want to make change, but the avenue is not always there.
Got it. Jed.
I just wanted to kind of shift the direction maybe just a smidge and talk about a misconception of what people think when an educator leaves the classroom. They think that we left angry or mad or bitter at an administration or a district. James and I had a meeting with our former Secretary of Education where she misquoted me and told lots of people that I left mad at my district. I got calls from my district office wanting to know what the deal was, and I had to tell them she's misunderstanding. I didn't say that. I didn't leave mad. The year before I left the classroom, I won a lot of awards. Y'all all mentioned about your work with Instoy and your state teacher of the year. I was a finalist here in South Carolina. I won a presidential award for math and science, the PAMPST award. I was in GQ, a male leader of the year for something I did with connecting my classroom. There was a lot of things that went on all in that same year. And suddenly I had this platform where people were listening to me. And some of the things that I wanted to talk about in education, I didn't feel comfortable talking about while I stayed in the classroom, because I work in a very conservative state that is a right to work state that can and will fire you without cause. Even with the new Supreme Court decision that you can't be fired for being a gay man, I promise you in South Carolina, you can still be fired for being a gay man. And they will. And there are some school districts in South Carolina that will not allow you to be an openly LGBTQ person. And about 3 years before I left the elementary classroom, I'd just come out. And that was something that was part of my advocacy work that I wanted to pursue. And I knew that if I stayed in my little second grade classroom, I was going to be silenced. And I took a new path, and was met with some silence even still. And so it forced me into the world where I am now, where I don't officially work for anybody but myself, so I can do the advocacy work that I want to do. I mentioned that I'm still in higher ed, so I don't feel a lot of times like I've left the classroom, because last semester I taught 6 courses. I was in the classroom. It wasn't a little first grade, second grade classroom, but I was in the classroom. Next semester I have 4 classes. So I'm still in that. It's just not in that traditional public school setting. But I'll tell you, the higher ed world, they appreciate advocacy work a lot more than the traditional K-12 public schools here in South Carolina. So that my leaving was connected to my personal life as much as it was a professional decision.
Well, first of all, thank you for opening up your personal life to us. You didn't have to. There's a lot of people who are going to say amen to that. And you're bringing in an aspect about employment law that people often forget. And it's been going on for a long time. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Who wants to go next? Oh, I see Karen.
Hey, I guess my experience kind of fits in between Paul and Jeb's.
Okay.
I am actually still in the classroom also. So I decided to move into consulting mostly because I live in a very rural part of the country. I'm about an hour from the Canadian border. So it's very cold. Not very many people live here. And so my work was mostly in smaller school districts. And for years, I was in the classroom for 20 years originally. I would go to professional development like before the school year started. And what school districts would have to do is pull together a whole bunch of districts in order to get a big enough audience to attract a consultant. And so we would have to travel and then sit in someone else's auditorium and listen to the experts tell us how to teach. But when you're in a rural remote setting, teaching is an entirely different ballgame. And so year after year of going to those kind of trainings and hearing teachers on the way back home say, well, it would be nice if we had those kind of resources, but we don't. So we can't really put into play any of the techniques that they're sharing with us. I could really see that there's this huge need, given the diversity of our school districts and our states and the way that we operate from very urban to very rural. There was a huge need for some kind of professional support for rural remote teachers. The drawback of that is rural remote schools don't have anything for resources. So finances comes into that too. If you're targeting a school population that can't support consultants, my consultant window is maybe 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning of the school year and 2 or 3 weeks at the end of the school year. And if I'm lucky, I can do some training in the summer. I can't maintain a full-time entrepreneurship that way because those teachers are in classrooms and they don't have ways to bring in consultants. They don't have funds to do it. And so I always kind of juggle the 2 hats of I teach. This coming year, I'm going to be working as a curriculum director for a school district. So my faucet is changing now finally, but I've been in the classroom the whole time. And I think that the need for teachers to have expertise and have access to the best research and the best strategies is often limited by the funding that a school district has or teachers have. And so you do the best you can with what you get. So that's been kind of my experience in rural areas is that you have to wear a lot of different hats, whether you're a consultant or a teacher. And it definitely complicates making a living out of it.
How did you, is there any particular technology or platform you use to work with your teachers in North Dakota? Did you find that you actually had to do something radically different that maybe someone else in another state didn't have to do?
I would say before COVID,
Yep.
my radically different was I would get in my car and I'd drive to a town of 1,500 people.
Okay.
And I'd say, okay, I'm here. Let me work with you. I know there's only 10 people on your staff, but I'm here to work with you. So, obviously, what you can charge for consulting is definitely different than what you would be doing if you're working for large school districts.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest drawback of technology is simply that rural remote schools until COVID didn't have them.
Yep.
And I think after COVID, that playing field is so much more even because now those teachers are comfortable using things like Zoom, unless you're in my part of the state where Zoom is not allowed because they don't think it's secure enough. So we get to use Google Classroom and Google Meet. That's it.
Okay.
So there's a lot of still kind of reserved tech beliefs, I think, about how secure is it and can we show student faces or can we have names on there or, all the small questions that schools that have been using technology for a long time have already addressed. But now teachers are more comfortable getting on with Zoom and other things and can reach out to experts in the field. And so I think it really is a point where rural education is blossoming because they do have this connection point that they're now comfortable with. And without COVID, I don't know that would have happened.
That's heavy.
Rural remote teachers tend to be fairly reserved when it comes to training and engaging in those kind of discussions. So a step forward for us, at least.
Okay. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer this question a bit backwards because for me, this question about staying or leaving the classroom, right? Even when Catherine asked me to do this, I was like, well, I'm not an educator anymore. Is that a problem? And she's like, but you are an educator still, right? When I was running my company, I was in the Learn Launch Accelerator in Boston, which was one of the best things that I have ever done. Cannot speak more highly about that program and that experience. And I found myself sitting around a table as the only person with any classroom experience at all, designing products that would ultimately land in classrooms and influence practice, right? And policies, right? At multiple levels of education. And yet then I would find little whispers on Twitter around my company, like around the handle where it was like, this is a for-profit company, it's bad. And I'm like, okay, like there was a bit of a disconnect. And I find that this conversation around leaving the classroom and going into another space, everyone here is still in education. Everyone here is still influencing some level of education. And I think this mindset that we have as teachers, especially you were talking about how did we enter the profession? I was 22. I didn't know anything but school. I entered the profession thinking this was it, right? This was my path. And I loved every second of it. And I was incredibly passionate about it. And I think that this identity that we wear as educators, that like, you're either in the classroom or you're not really teaching anymore. And we do it to ourselves. I do it to myself, right? I think it's a false narrative that is actually damaging to the profession as a whole, because we need classroom educators at every level of education, that when there's any influence on the classroom. So when I was a classroom teacher, I had to push back on curriculum that was forced upon me that I knew was damaging to my students. Somebody was sitting at a table making decisions about what that curriculum was, and it eventually trickled down to me. Somebody sitting at that table should have been a classroom teacher, right? And so for me, to answer your question backwards, I see now, having had the experiences that I've had laterally in education, in for-profit, nonprofit, as a consultant, in the classroom, when I see the landscape that way, I understand that what happened for me, the moment for me to leave, I knew pretty quickly, and to be quite frank, not to go into politics, it was in 2016, when all of our lives drastically changed. And I was in a very conservative area, and it's like I took the blue pill and I knew too much for my own good. And it was like wearing a shoe that didn't fit anymore, because there was so much that I wanted to do and influence, that it was like ceilings and walls all around me, where I felt like I could not be impactful in that environment in the way that I wanted to be anymore. And so the path toward being an ed tech entrepreneur was really accidental. I am not a technologist. I am not a coder. That was never on my life plan. But I really wanted to find a way to connect awesome teachers. And I felt like that was the special sauce for education. If you can just get out of the way of good teaching and wrap a ton of supports around amazing teachers, then that will solve a lot of our problems. And so I thought maybe there was a path in technology to do that. And that's kind of how it happened for me. But, I think this conversation, the thing that I'm often telling teachers, and I'll end with this last year with the pandemic, I find that a lot of teachers will find me and they ask me for career advice. That's literally the thing that I answer more than anything, which is really interesting and not something I solicit, but they'll find me. I'll get messages on Twitter or whatever, where they want to know, how did you do that? How did you step into that? And I think we're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years, more teachers knocking on this door, because there is space for everyone. And we need people who have classroom experience influencing all levels of education.
You mentioned when you opened 4 numbers, I don't know if it was 2183. Talk to us about that and what it represents.
I have to actually give credit to Nate Bowling for the name of that project. 2892 is the distance across the continental United States. And the idea being that, last summer I'm in Louisville. We all know what life was like in Louisville, Kentucky, about this time last year. And I spent a lot of time at Black Lives Matter rallies. And I remember just feeling, I was in the classroom for 14 years, and I did a lot of what I thought was equity work. And I suddenly realized I don't know anything, right? Like I suddenly it was like teacher became a student real fast. And I felt like the best place to learn was A, in your own backyard, and B, by community leaders who had been doing the work of equity and justice for years and years, decades and decades. And so I thought, what if there is a way that we can literally map the opportunity to learn from your backyard, but also connect the dots across all of them? And so I had lots of preliminary conversations as I was, thinking up this idea. As a white woman, obviously, I felt like I was limited in the path that I should walk in that place. So I reached out to a few colleagues, and Nate Bowling was actually the one who was like, you should think about distance. And so that's where the name came, and I love it. So I'm grateful to him.
Got it. Thank you. Julia, we're going to go to you.
I'm listening to all of the numbers of how many years of experience everyone has had. And I agree with Ashley that there's such a benefit to starting in education, and 50% of teachers quit within the first 5 years. Most principals last only 3 years. And I don't think that I had like an aha moment that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It happened because I was teaching at a school, and then I got married. My husband got a job somewhere else. And I thought, well, I'll try to do something for the summer on my own. And then if it doesn't work, then I'll get hired by a school that has an opening in August. And I don't think that I felt confident saying that I was a consultant until I had evidence that it was helping, the same way I didn't really feel like I was a teacher until I had evidence that I was teaching things. And I think the longer that I was in education, the more responsibilities I received, and the more challenging the needs of the students that I was working with became. And so much of my training had been deficit-based, and looking at ways to improve bad attendance or poor reading levels, or help students who have like a lot of anger issues that get in the way of learning. And it was always, what is the problem? Let's reduce it. What's the problem? Let's reduce it. And I wanted to learn a science-based approach to having more of an asset-based lens on my students, and not just think about how can we reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety? How can we reduce burnout in teachers? But how can we instead cultivate things like optimism, resilience, kindness, love? And one of the key findings when I went to graduate school to study this, while I was also still teaching, was that kids learn well-being through observation and through implicit models. And so I knew from working in education for longer than most of my peers that schools cannot run without the best teachers in the building. And I had the privilege of being a teacher of the year and listening in on conversations like this one. And I've been obsessed with excellent teachers ever since I joined the profession. And so I thought, well, the people who are implicitly modeling well-being in schools are the teachers like each of you, who are finding a way to stay engaged in this work. And so I had been studying the mindsets of people like that. And then, sort of like Karen said, I recognized that so much of what I was learning was helping me, but it was I had a very unique opportunity that I could go study in grad school. And learning about psychology and my own psychology always helped me. But even living in big cities, there's such a barrier to going to see a therapist or taking time for yourself because of time, because of, even if your school pays for it, because of time and travel, and or there's a stigma against it. And so I wanted to come up with a way to help reinforce the positive psychological behaviors of high-performing teachers, and get schools to pay for that, and support the sort of onboarding process to take away some of the barriers
in this area. Ashley mentioned the term teacher becomes student, and all of us are lifelong learners. The whole idea that somehow when you graduate and you throw your cap in the air, you're done, that's just not how humans operate. So if I take the theme, teacher becomes student, what in your background and training, whether you were in an education school or another school, what about your training prepared you for the entrepreneurial journey you're on? And what do you wish your educational training would have done to prepare you, in fact, for what you're doing right now?
Can I jump in on that one?
Sure. Go ahead, Jed.
I don't know what grade everybody taught when they were in the regular classroom. But when you teach first grade, you have to be ready for anything. And as an entrepreneur, you definitely have to be ready for anything. COVID proves that, when Paul said he went from suddenly employed fully to fully unemployed, I felt that deeply, because it was a shock to the system when that hit us all. But when you teach first grade, you never know when a kid's going to throw up. You never know when one's going to have an accident in their pants. You never know when you're going to rip your own pants standing in front of the whole class, and have to be ready for it. And those kind of lessons, they really help you for life as an entrepreneur, because every single day that I wake up, now all of my classes I teach in higher ed are on Tuesday. So Tuesday is my in-class day. The rest of the week is me figuring out the unexpected. Every day I get an email asking me about something else. Can I come do this gig or that gig? Can I write an article for this publication? It's figuring out how to deal with the unexpected. So that definitely was something that the classroom taught me, something that I wished the higher ed would have taught me. was how to utilize all of the things that I do as a teacher beyond the classroom for financial and professional gain. I'll just throw it out there.
Sure.
There's so many things that we as educators have in our tool bag that we're not taught to use beyond that classroom. But there's so many things that we can do beyond that classroom that can bring us financial increase, professional increase, educational increase. And I just don't, I feel like we were taught to be way more humble and not brag and put ourselves out there. Teacher education, we should be the ones telling the stories and putting the work out there. When I was in college, it was before social media was a thing, as I will quickly say it was for all of us. No offense to anybody. But when social media emerged, our districts were like, no, you can't do this. This is bad. Man, the teachers who didn't do it, they missed out, because there were some who did that now make tons of money doing the same thing online that they were doing in the four walls of their classroom. Mm-hmm. And I wish that higher ed could have capitalized that. They're still not capitalizing on it, and not in my area. I'm trying my best, but I wish that would have been something that they would have pushed a little bit more and encouraged this entrepreneurship for teachers.
Okay. Just jump in as you like, anyone.
Well, I'll add one quick thing about that, because this is near and dear to my heart, and an issue that I think is really critical. And kind of to riff on what I said before, I think one of the problems, is that, again, I started when I was 22, and then 10 years later, I'm supposed to teach college and career readiness. What do I know about career readiness? I have been an academic my whole life, right? So we have this system where you have people who are academics who do not have experience, who often, not always, but do not have experience beyond the realm of academia, who are teaching teachers how to teach young people how to experience the world without actually really knowing it. So one of the things when I was teacher of the year, I was on a sabbatical with the State Department. I was a big advocate for teacher externships at the time. I'm like, instead of going and sitting in a PD, can we, like, if you're a biology teacher, can you go work in a biomedical lab? Like, I was an English teacher, and when I started writing for The Atlantic, I was like, I have been completely teaching writing wrong. Like, I literally just turned everything upside down, because the things that my editors were telling me to do in 2015 or whatever were literally contradictory to the things that I was telling my kids to do. So I just feel like the more we can provide opportunities and make it okay for teachers to step outside of the realm of their classroom to learn and grow and be and contribute beyond it, the better our students are going to be as a result of that time.
I've been a big proponent of the externship concept. If you look, for example, at a chemistry teacher, why not have a chemical company or a pharmaceutical company hire that teacher for 4 to 8 weeks during the summer, pay same salary they would earn if they were a full-time student, which in some instances could double their salary per month of what they would have as a teacher. And then they would go back and have practical experience, because we know the 10-month contract could be a challenge for some people, but the state or the school district who decides to make that available to 25% of their teachers are going to see something radically different in terms of how teachers come back to the classroom and offer.
I think K-12, good teachers just have a ridiculous work ethic. If you really think about a 24-hour period of time and what a fine educator does in that 24 hours is really amazing. I think another thing that good teachers are able to do that a lot of folks, it's an acquired skill, is they're able to read a room. Those of us that you have classrooms of 30 kids, if you can't read a room and know what's going on with each one of those kids, you're in trouble, or at least the kid is going to lose. And good teachers can do that. And in any social situation, that is a crazy, wicked skill to have when you're dealing with human beings. not in a manipulative kind of way, but in an empowering kind of way. In terms of what I wished higher ed would have taught was more of, it's still a place that doesn't push risk.
Okay.
And I think higher ed is a place that could do that much easier and really push people to take risks and then support them in those risks, whether they work out the way you thought they would or not, and then learn from that and move on. That's something about being a professional educator that should formally be looked at.
That's a good point, because in a business school, taking risk is not only encouraged, but the more failures you have, people seem to clap.
Right.
When you are in a business school, people say you're a disruptor. That means you're an entrepreneur. But if you're a student, you get detention.
Yes.
And so very different ways of how to look at it.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Paul and James, what are your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Paul. I think that's a beautiful segue from something Paul mentioned earlier about like not knowing what you're doing in consulting for the first year. It's the license to take those risks in that first year. And now you're going to learn from that and eventually build the repertoire and the acumen. But that risk-taking point I thought was really salient. Gerard, I didn't learn a lot from teacher prep that prepared me for entrepreneurship. I'm just gonna be honest about it. Now, what I learned in that classroom, that geared me up, because as Jed mentioned, that's the most dynamic environment I've ever been a part of. And once you leave there and you see what other people do, not to be elitist, but I defy anyone to step into a classroom and do what I did for 6 years in East Charlotte in Garinger High School. There's so much happening. The skill set that one is required to develop, the self-reliance, all of those are the ingredients for entrepreneurship. I took a personality profile not long ago, and I did okay, right, as far as they go, but I showed my profile to a friend, and in the area of collaboration, there was some area of need for growth there. And what she said was, I look at everything here and I don't necessarily see that as a knock. I see that as an entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs I know, they're kind of like, let me take it, I'll handle it. And as a teacher, you're naturally kind of have that disposition anyway. And so I feel like those are the things that as I launched out into the deep and I, was unafraid to fail, the sort of, I'll take it on myself. Let me just do this because, I'm used to doing all the elements of preparing for a lesson and the grading and the communication and the cold calling anyway, that it lowered that barrier for me.
Okay. Paul, and then we'll go to Barbara.
Yeah, I think first, to be meta for just a second, I think on the internet this week, Jeff Bezos is going to space. And the joke going around the internet was, what do you call it when a billionaire goes to space? And everybody was saying it's a good start. So I think you could make a similar joke about what do you call it when you put 8 educational consultants in a Zoom room where they only get to talk 12.5% of the time. For me, it's therapy. This is really fun to sit here and just quietly be on mute and listen to everything you're doing. And lots of times when you're a consultant, you always have to be, that quote unquote expert. But anyway, so thanks for that, Gerard, for giving me a little bit of time to quietly listen. I think it's been fun. I would totally agree with kind of what James said. In my all my teacher training, I learned more in my first day of student teaching than I did in all the teacher training. And I learned more in my first day of teaching than I did in all of my student teaching. And I learned more in my first experience working as a consultant, traveling and working with schools than I did in everything before that. So I like, Gerard, your ideas of getting teachers' experiences in that. That seems like you really need to get your foot in the door and try it. And also don't do it for free. There's something different about that. Because I spent 20 years being a consultant for free and just hustle, you know what I mean? And that's different. I'm a professional, I'm a consultant, you pay me, I do work. That was a big game change because I did other things before that.
Yep.
Well, I just want to go on. I think, Ashley, you brought this up, and Paul. And again, Paul, I love this too. I love the listening part of this. because everything you guys are saying is so incredible for me to kind of put together. I think, through a lot, having come from a private career before where, earning money was what you expected, and the more money that you earned, that was kind of how you were going up in the pecking order. With teaching, I always felt that we were expected not to really be earning a lot of money, and that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And I found that odd when I went into education, that, you had to fight for every little raise you were going to get. And it was like, boards of ed saying, well, how dare they want like, another dollar, an hour. It was like, I thought, wow, these poor people, I mean, they really have to fight for and I'm watching these teachers who barely get a chance to go to the bathroom. They don't ever take a lunch break. They're eating at their desks. They're working, they're in early, they're there late. Right. And so there's this guilt thing tied to the salary that teachers feel they should be making. And that's got to change. And, they really need to step up. And I feel that, and I do that in my own community. In fact, my daughter, I'm so proud of her, just went on the board of ed in her town, trying to say, teachers deserve to be paid. They're professional people. And we don't question what our doctor charges us or what our dentist charges us, but we're going to negotiate what we think our teachers deserve to be paid. This has got to change in this country, or we will never be able to attract the best people and hold them in this profession. We won't.
Both you and Tim hit on the point about perception and about money. It's so true. So when I graduated from Howard University, I guess 30 years ago, I became a 5th grade school teacher, and people would pat me on the back. Oh, that's good. Do it for the cause. My roommate goes and works for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. My other roommate goes and works as an engineer. And people are like, yeah, go and make that money. As if somehow I'm doing the good work, but they're doing the real work. And you're right. Until we change the mindset, because people say there's no money in education, I said, come with me to the next investors conference where they're looking at investing in the next startup company for education. Some of those people are educators. There's a lot of money, but there's definitely a mindset we have to change, that you go and teach and be broke to be blessed. But somehow the other people can be rich and resourceful and right. Yeah, got to look at that differently.
I have to laugh. I need to interject. I have to laugh about the summer programs of the internships, because we had a section that did that in Ohio for a brief period of time, and 2 things happened. One, they called it Teachers to Work program. Which we had a major problem with that, right. That narrative for what you just stated. And the other was they would give us these tasks that literally they thought would take us 3 months, and we'd finish it in a day and a half. And then they didn't know what to do with us. And that was a number of people that were, these wonderful educators. So all of a sudden the program fell apart only because nobody had the vision of what that really, really could do, which is what we all started talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. It was piecemealed out that way, which was unfortunate.
And I have to laugh at something that Barbara reminded me of. I started off as a 5th grade school teacher. I didn't realize how much more I peed until I went to work for the nonprofit sector. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to laugh at that. I never calculated that when I left medicine, that you couldn't go to the bathroom when you needed to. Right. And I thought, how do you go to the bathroom here? Like, who do you get to come? No, this was like my hugest issue, where I thought I was going to have to leave year 1 because I didn't know how you went to the bathroom when you were a teacher even.
Right.
The last several years at elementary school, I used to drink this whole jug every day. I could make it all the way to the end of the day, and that's saying something. Yeah.
Right. Well, we're coming toward the end of our time, and I want to give everybody an opportunity just to, as you said, Paul, about listening. And so the question I have for you, and we'll start with you, Karen. What did you hear tonight that gives you some inspiration to continue to do what you do as an entrepreneur? We'll start with you, and then we'll do a round robin.
I think events like this are so amazing simply because you feel that camaraderie, and that's really something that makes the teaching profession stand out to me, especially when you're working in remote places. Lots of times you don't have colleagues to talk to. And it's getting together for events like this where someone reaffirms something but nobody has said to you for years. Just like the notion that Ashley that teachers should be part of the curriculum development table is such a meaningful thing to say. And I think it all the time, but wow, is it nice to hear another professional say it and support it and know that there are colleagues all around doing amazing things. I think that in itself it makes these kind of events so worth it. So that's the biggest thing I take away is you get rejuvenated, you get re-energized, you know that you've got work to do and there's other people that believe that work's important and that you can go somewhere with it.
Thank you, Karen. Julia, let's go to you.
I think one of my biggest takeaways is that I'm just proud to be an educator and to be working with teachers. And just like Karen said, like it's so inspiring to be able to listen to other extremely passionate, high performing educators. And so many schools, their most experienced teacher has 10 years of experience. I think it's part of why I was a school leader so young, because I was one of the oldest people in my building. And this conversation just makes me so passionate to continue to help educators stay in the game and whatever that means for them. And there is a lot of research around how part of what allows educators to stay in the classroom is having a side outlet where they're able to use their skills in a novel way and in a novel setting. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of encouraging the teachers that I work with to do that. But mostly I'm just walking away with pride for our profession and continued hope for our schools.
Thank you, Julia. Let's go to you, Ashley.
I think, you know, I would agree, like it is good to be reminded that there's a community out there. Because I think, you know, this consultant life, whatever we want to call it, it can be a bit tunnel vision and you get really focused on your world and your work. And often you find yourself the experienced educator in the room while other people are not, at least I do. And so it, you know, just changes are coming. I feel the energy, the urgency from this conversation around people, you know, with this kind of drive, pushing on the system, outside of it, within it, you know, across all the ways. And I forget that sometimes until conversations like this. So it's an honor to be a part of it.
Thank you, Ashley. Tim.
I'm going to echo the same thing. You know, Camus has always been a friend of mine, and you're members of the league. And we forget sometimes that the league is out there. And one of the other things that I look back on when I get together with NSTOY, and this is another form of that. It's not just NSTOY, but when you find educators that are of alike minds, what's nice is after a while you understand you're not coworkers, you're colleagues. That there's a big difference, and that you become friends. And when you get together, you spend about 10 minutes talking about previous experience you had. And then the rest of the conversation is, where are we going next? Mm-hmm. And we come up with ideas of things that we've tried, things that we're working on. We build on those ideas for one another, which is why listening to this group has been fun for me this evening as well. Reminded me of some things, and it's pushed me in terms of, yeah, and now I need to do this as well. And it's a reinvigoration of being a professional. So thank you all.
Thank you, Tim. Jed.
I've been thinking about this. In 2003, Peter Reynolds wrote a children's book called The Dot. I don't know if y'all have ever read it. I hope you have. As educators, you should definitely read it. But the second page of the book, the teacher looked at the student and said, just make a mark and see where it takes you. And by the end of the book, Vashti, the student, had become the teacher and made so many marks that she had passed on her influence to the next artist in the book. And what I look at the work that I'm doing is I'm making marks, hoping to pass the work on to the next person. I'm 43, and while that's not too old, especially now that I'm 43. It used to be old. When I was 20, I thought 43 was old. But when I think about being 43, I know that, every year I have left is one that I want to make a mark and see what happens. And that's what I get to do with this work. And it's very humbling when somebody emails me and says, hey, your work influenced me to do this, to do that. I speak out on issues because you speak out. I stand up for my equality, but you speak out. There's an Argentinian proverb that I've always lived by. It says, if I pass through life without making a mark, for what did I live? And so that's how I see the work that I'm doing. I'm making marks. Sometimes they're little tiny ones, but those little tiny marks add up. And at the end of my life, I hope that I'll turn around and say, wow, I made a difference, and I pass it on to the next group.
Thank you, Jed. Let's go to Paul.
Yeah, for me, a good metric of who's learning in a class is the person who's talking. And so tonight, it was fun I think I learned something to answer the question, Gerard. Like, I think I learned something from all of you, or took away something from all of you tonight, which I super appreciate. I think the thing that really was hit home was something about between what James and Tim and Barbara were saying, but it was really about, like, there's a lot of people who can do this. We just had to get them experiences. And I think, Ashley, you said the question we get all the time is, how do I do that? How do I do a similar job like that? And I think that's an indicator that there's a bunch of potential out there for people who can do work like this. And it's not on them to ask us, it's on us to ask them. It's to identify the teachers who could do a very similar thing and say, like, I see huge potential in what you can do. This is what I did. Let me know how I can support you along that path. I think that's, for me, a big takeaway from that. It's on me to identify those people. So again, thanks for all the learning.
Thanks, Paul. Barbara.
Well, I'm not going to divulge my age like some of you youngsters have, but suffice it to say, I'm a lot older than all of you. And listening to you tonight, seeing your faces, seeing your passion, seeing your youthfulness makes me so excited and so happy that you're all out there and you're going to pick up this mantle. I always think about Catherine and I, who met back in the year 2000. So that gives you some sense of, like, and we were already older than some of you at that point. And we often say, who's going to be fighting this fight? Who's going to be out? And I look at you guys and I think this is the greatest thing. I am so happy right now to hear all of you and everything that you're doing and all the enthusiasm and the passion that you have. So that makes me feel completely energized to take my old body and keep doing it, because I know you guys are going to be out there and you're going to be following behind us, and you're going to help attract those great teachers and support them and give them other opportunities and show them that they're out there. So I just want to thank every one of you, because you've really made me feel terrific tonight. Truly. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. James.
Yeah, I would say it's best summarized in two things. The first one is make space. I think all of us, given the various diverse ways we approach consulting and defining that, I think is inspiring. I mean, from curriculum writing to technology platforms to, decreasing burnout and, to inspiring playfulness and joy and rural ed and, YouTubing. We all looked at the landscape and we saw a void, and because it didn't exist, we created it. So just, make space. And I would say the second thing is this notion of risk taking, and not just like risk reward and typical like economic thinking, but particularly like, some of us, we do this work at incredible risk, speaking out on issues to ourselves. I've been edified by that conversation. The work that I do, now running an education nonprofit that focuses on racial equity in education, in these environments, speaking out and advocating for those issues is incredibly risky. But the ability to step forth and do that with boldness is important. So I got that from this conversation.
Thank you, James. I've got two takeaways. One is, as all of you began to share your stories, the challenges, also some of the triumphs, is remind me of a book that I believe my fourth grade teacher read to me called Just So Thoughts. And I believe it's Kipling who actually wrote that. And there's a chapter in there, or a story, about how the leopard got its spots. And one of the things I remember in hearing that, even to this day, is I was like, because it attracted or inspired in me wonder. And as you get older, you seem or tend to lose wonder. For life, you just seem to forget wonder. And that's what keeps you interested in going. And so all of you still have the spirit of wonder. And so that's encouraging because, again, we often lose it. So people who will listen to this or who will watch it may walk away with that. Entrepreneurship, you're right. Some people think entrepreneurship means you have to leave the classroom, and Karen has showed us that's not the case. Or Ashley, if you think of entrepreneurship, it's only if it's for profit is bad, not realizing that the textbooks, the desks, the buses the children ride, the schools they wear have been made by for-profit companies. And the fact even teacher unions have invested money into, I guess, the pension funds, big returns from that are coming from entrepreneurial endeavors. So for me, when I think of entrepreneurship, bureaucrats see an opportunity and often call it a problem because it involves risks. An entrepreneur sees a problem and calls it an opportunity because they see beyond it. They see around the corner. And so I want to thank all of you for encouraging wonder and for being the risk taker, but more importantly, being the entrepreneur and understanding that we can radically change how we think about ourselves by one student, one person, one teacher at a time. Again, my name is Gerard Robinson. Thank you so much for joining us for another session of In Character. As I said, this was going to be a very special conversation, and it has been. Tune in for the next event where we have with other educators who will talk to us about a different subject. With that, let me say thank you to everyone.